Hello, leaders. Welcome back. I'm so glad that you're here because, again, it shows that you are 100% committed to helping your workforce heal their hearts from everything they experience every single day. And today's podcast is all about ownership and accountability and the way you deliver feedback. And boy, oh boy, I was inspired this week when I just read this article from Jody Helmer called Why Nurses Quit. And boy, did it speak volumes to me. And I thought it was fascinating in this article how they really focused on over a period of 2 years, how a third of nurses typically quit and leave the workforce. So they say in the article, over 262,000 registered nurses graduate every year, and 33% are quitting within the first 2 years. And again, it just surprises me, but it doesn't surprise me because when it comes to leadership, we have such a responsibility to make sure that our workforce feels like they can do the work that they can do. And there are so many things that factor into that equation. And I absolutely love in this article how they point out that not only is there a current shortage of about 78,610 registered nurses, but the latest data shows that 900,000 nurses, nearly 1/5 of the total registered nurses in the United States, plan to leave the profession by 2027. So you know this, there's lots of reasons for why it happens. And the article goes into detail as to some of those reasons. Burnout, stressful working conditions, poor staffing ratios, lack of leadership, and low pay and benefits topping the list. Now, we're not going to solve all those things today. Trust me, we're not. But we are going to talk about those things that you can do as a leader to make a difference, to make such an impact on the way you are leading your workforce. It is 100% possible. And if you're sitting there wondering, why do I need to do things differently? Why should I be motivated to do something differently? I'm going to remind you the demands that are placed on our healthcare workers that are working even in a post-COVID world are so much more intense than they were. I mean, most healthcare workers, I know when I do a lot of education, are always saying, just like their leaders, boy, do I wish we could go back to those pre-COVID days. I mean, that's what people are craving. And that is how quickly in healthcare things continue to evolve. And I'm also going to remind you, as a leader, not only are you leading and managing and inspiring and motivating and encouraging the workforce, the people that are your workforce are turning around and they are providing care to the patients and families and visitors of those who need healing as well. So it all matters. And again, part of your role as a leader is to recognize that a big piece of your team's success in staying in the game and staying focused on being the best healthcare worker they can be under the conditions that they need to work under is going to be you making sure that you're helping them integrate into their daily routine ways that they can also heal their hearts and get the self-care they need so they can come back and do it all over again. I mean, that's what they were designed to do. And as a leader, you were put on this earth with an enormous duty and responsibility to care for the people who care for people. And that means as a leader, you can't just walk on by, and you have to really think about the way you are interacting with every single person that's on your team. It is so incredibly important. And to do this, and to do this well, you must embrace a mindset where you recognize if you do nothing, you might just be responsible for not helping a person, a team member, someone with this gift, this superpower from doing the best work they were supposed to do. That it was you, the leader, who helped inspire and encourage them to do things differently. And that's going to come from you modeling the way as a leader. And I always like to tell leaders, when you do nothing, when you walk by, and when you don't invest in that person and consider that an opportunity to guide and support and to approach and to use it as a teachable moment, you accept mediocrity. You are responsible for allowing things to continue without them being handled in an appropriate and an effective way, a way that encourages and inspires your workforce to do things differently. Not because their boss told them to do it, but because the way you help them see the situation, help them to self-reflect and look deep and inward, and to look and see how they might approach a situation differently. So a big piece of this equation starts with the way you form the relationships with your team members. You know, you've heard me talk about this over and over again. I've had hundreds of tips and ways that I've done this myself as a leader by making sure the relationship starts off right in the first pass. And that includes making sure that you are talking to your team members about what your expectations are for the way that we work around here, how you as a leader are there to provide and offer support, especially in challenging and difficult times, and how you are there as a resource should they need additional support. And when you get to know each person, and again, I'm going to remind you, every single person in your team is unique and different and needs to be led in a way that speaks to them. So that means you, as this leader, you have an opportunity to learn, grow, and engage and communicate with your teams in a way that reaches inside and touches their heart and gets them again ready for the next day. And the work that they do is full of challenges. I say this all the time. I remember when I graduated nursing school, there wasn't a time where anybody sat me down and said this very simple picture and presented it to me, where they explained to me how healthcare is constantly evolving and shifting and is full of unpredictability. That every single day, even though you're going to get to a point where you're going to feel like you've mastered your skills, you've achieved mastery, you've developed, you know how to think critically and do things in the day-to-day, there are still going to be situations and things that happen to you that are going to impact your ability to do that well. And that may cause you to be stressed. And that is something you need to be aware of, because when you're stressed, the bad behaviors come out, and that 100% affects the way you deliver care and the way a person receives care. And it 100% affects the way a person receives healing. I mean, think about it. Have you ever been in a situation where you could feel the energy of somebody who was highly stressed when you were in a situation where you needed to receive care? So these are all moments that we must, as leaders, do better at preparing our workforce for the challenges that are ahead, and simply making sure that they know that they can expect and anticipate these challenges to occur. But no worry, because you're the leader and you are there to support them even during their difficult times. And this happens all the time in healthcare. And I want to believe, again, this comes from a place where when we think about it in terms of leadership, we don't do such a great job of talking about ownership and accountability, not just for the individual, but for us as leaders and how we are going to interact with our teams to use experiences as teachable moments, because it's coming from a place and a spirit where you are trying to get them to be the best healthcare worker possible. So there are some things you have to be thinking about when you're going down this road of supporting your team members so they can be the best version possible. We already talked about getting those expectations out of the way and making sure that your team members they hear them and they understand them. We already talked about the importance of making sure you've set the relationship based on trust. That means you're explaining to people what you're there for and how you're going to help coach and guide and support them. Check. That's out of the way. And then it comes down to talking to your team members openly and honestly about the way in which they would like to receive feedback. And I will always encourage leaders, listen, the best way to do this is very early on in the process when you're getting to know your team member. I mean, if you wait 2 years to have this conversation, of course it's going to feel awkward and it's going to seem very strange to them that right out of the blue, now all of a sudden you're talking to them about how they want to receive feedback. And it will automatically put their backs up against the wall. So if you do this in the beginning of forming the relationship where you're saying to an individual, I want to be that best boss for you possible. I see something in you that I don't think many people see, and I want to make sure that every single interaction that we have, that I am guiding you, I'm supporting you, and want you to know that you can expect from me if I see that you might be able to handle something differently or manage a situation differently, because it's going to happen. We're in healthcare and it's unpredictable and every day is different. And there might come a time where you may feel like you are not positioning yourself for having the best day possible, because it's life and things come in the way and things happen every single day. And that influences the way care is delivered if you're not careful. So how do you do that? It's by inviting that two-way discussion. That is paramount to your success. And so many times leaders skip this important step. And if you skip this step, you will find yourself not being able to land feedback in a way that comes from a place and a spirit where you're trying to use teachable moments and coaching to guide them to change maybe the way they're looking or responding or acting in a given situation. It's going to come from a place where people will look at it and it will come at a spirit where they will interpret it very differently. And I always say when it comes to feedback This is something that most leaders feel so incredibly uncomfortable about, because delivering feedback and delivering feedback well, that changes the way a person sees a situation, that gets them to self-reflect in their quiet time and to come back the next time thinking about it in a way that, how could I do it differently, is the natural discussion. And that's not going to happen if it's not set up for success. So again, the first thing you can do after you've gotten all those other things out of the way is actually have a conversation about delivering feedback. I feel like this is the one thing that most leaders land poorly. They don't even talk about how a person may or may not want to receive feedback. So for you, that means just simply saying, I want to be the best leader possible for you. I want you to know when you come to work that I've got your back, and that I know that there are going to be times that mistakes are going to happen. And I know there are going to be times where things are going to occur and you are going to feel like you wish you could rewind things and do it all over again. That happens to the best of us. And we're here in life school doing this important work, which is we take care of human beings, and the way we do it matters. And so there are going to be days where you do it well, and there are going to be days where you do it poorly. And that's okay. If that happens, I'm going to be there by your side, and we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about ways, and I'm going to question you, and I'm going to ask you to self-reflect and think about how you could have handled that situation differently. And why am I going to do that? Because it is my belief system as your leader that you can do this, and you can do this well. And that if you're not thinking first independently about how you might have changed your actions or handled a situation differently, and I just jump in and give you all the answers, then it's not a teachable moment. It's just that simple. But that being said, I also want you to know that I'm the type of leader that also wants this to be two-way. I mean, I want you to share with me how I could do things better, because I'm not going to be perfect every time either. And so that simple conversation, if you just practice it over and over again and you get it in your mind, trust me when I tell you, it will look completely different. You will set the conditions for this exchange to happen beautifully, naturally, and organically. And people's defenses will be down, and they won't be agitated, or they won't be expecting the worst from a leader who just has not even given them the opportunity to prepare them. So there are some key things that you need to be thinking of, though, when you're going through this journey of delivering feedback to your team members. And let's talk about them, because every single one of us needs to look inward as a leader and examine ourselves and make sure that we're looking at this from a lens of, what if? How could I? Let me investigate and think about this differently. It's so important as you're here in life school. So the first thing you need to be thinking of is your intent. Like, what is the purpose of your feedback? What is the purpose of you intervening in a moment? And is it because you want to help to improve someone? Or is it because you're going to simply criticize them for the way they handled a situation? Now, you know this because it's probably happened to you a million times over. When someone's intent is to criticize you, they're going to drive you away. And if that is your intent, that you are critically looking at a person because they're not doing it in the exact way possible that you believe it should be done, then you have to think about that. And again, I'm not telling you that there aren't certain practices in the field of healthcare that we do need to do exactly and perfectly the same way? Of course there are. I mean, that's how evidence-based practices are determined. We do things in such a way so that when we replicate it, we get great outcomes. That's going to happen for every single one of you. But I'm talking about the different types of ways and recognizing that every single person is unique and they are an individual and they come from different backgrounds and they come from different experiences. And if you haven't set this up for success, there is a high likelihood that that feedback is going to land in a way that that person is meant to feel demeaned, devalued, and disengaged. It happens all of the time. And so you have to think about these things, especially because in the field of healthcare, our workforce is not only multicultural, it's multi-generational. And so the way you interact with people matters. But first and foremost, always trust that the purpose for you delivering feedback should always be in the spirit of helping someone to improve, to be better, and not necessarily from the way you want to see it, but from a spirit of how it affects care delivery and how that care delivery and those outcomes will be improved as a result. That's the teachable moment. And so another consideration you have to think of is that you have to look at the timing of the feedback and the content of the feedback. Those are two gigantic pieces that leaders often lose sight of and they completely dismiss and forget. And so when I mean the timing of feedback, I literally mean the timing of feedback. If you haven't had that conversation and build trust with your team members to say, like, listen, I'm the type of leader that I want you to come to me with anything that happens, right? So if something happens, the last thing I want to see you is to be stressed and feel like you can't come in and talk to me about what just occurred. I want to be that type of leader that creates a space for you to know that once you come to my office or we sit down and have a conversation, that this is a safe place for you. See, a lot of things happen in healthcare and a lot of things get covered up when staff members feel and team members feel like they are afraid or they have a fear of coming to you to have a discussion. So you create those conditions, but the timing matters. So if you observe something, depending on what that is, you may need to step in with a greater sense of urgency, and you may need to pull back and wait a little bit to find that right time to initiate that conversation. Again, this is where the balance occurs. And for some leaders, this is really hard because they're not sure the best way to do that. And I'm going to challenge you to think about it differently. Obviously, if you have a life-threatening situation where you need to remove a staff member because they're doing something incorrectly, that would be 1,000% appropriate, right? Not like sitting back and thinking, you know what, I'm going to wait and I'll pull them aside later. No, of course not. That's where you're going to handle things differently, right? You know, situation, high priority, high risk, patient safety, all of that stuff. That is a completely different story than you observing a situation, maybe the way somebody handled a conversation with a family member, or they responded in a certain way, or they're really stressed out and someone came up to them and they might not have landed that perfectly. And you could see that as an opportunity for them to think about how they might have responded or reacted differently. That might be a moment where you say to somebody towards the end of their shift, or you have a conversation and say, when you take a break, can you swing by my office? I'd like to have a chat. And don't worry, it's not that you're in trouble. I just want to better understand. Again, that is a big piece of the equation. I mean, it's your ability to notice the differences. And I remember having this conversation with one of my siblings when our children were younger. I want to say teens, like having this conversation and talking about even as a parent, like knowing the difference where you're going to lose it as a parent versus like you're disappointed and upset, but you really don't want to destroy the way your child feels in that moment, because like really when you think about it, you could put it in the perspective of, okay, it was a mistake. It was something they did. They made a bad decision. They maybe weren't thinking something through, versus somebody did something that was horribly terrible. And you thought, this is where I need to take action and make sure I'm punishing or I'm doing something in a way, right? Like for a parent, that's a hard thing to learn in life school, because there are times when, we have to teach and guide just like we are as leaders. And there are times when, depending on the situation, we need to actually, and based on that response and how that child responds, we might need to do things differently, right? It's no different, right, when you're taking care of people. So you have to think about that timing and how you're going to do that. And please, 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 never, never, never like hold on to feedback for an extended period of time. And then you are so stressed that you never delivered it, that you're going to now deliver it on that Friday before you leave for the weekend, because that person is going to be thinking about that all day, all weekend long, right? And you just kind of offloaded what you procrastinated and were not prepared to do to make yourself feel better, but you didn't really think of the context and the content and how it would make that other person feel. And that leads to content, which is another big consideration. I can't stress this enough. The content of what you deliver matters. Words matter. And so if you do not have mastery of delivering feedback, which many people don't until they've been doing this for an extended period of time, if you haven't achieved mastery, get into the really good habit of giving yourself some time to prepare some written notes and even work with a trusted, maybe peer leader that you can have a conversation with to say, hey, I have to have a conversation. I want to make this a teachable moment. Do you have a minute if I just run this by you? Tell me how you think this person might perceive this or receive it. Again, you doing your prep is going to help tremendously in this process. It's going to build your confidence up. And again, you're going to get a perspective of somebody that might say, I think it's good, but I don't think it's teachable. I think you're directing and trying to tell somebody to do it the way you want to do it, right? So maybe looking at the way you might be able to ask questions differently might be a way to help. Another big consideration when it comes to delivering feedback is your employees' readiness to receive it. So I always tell leaders, like, this is how you have to get really, really good at reading the room. Like if you've ever done this, I do this a lot because I'm a consultant and, I work with so many healthcare centers, and I can go into a situation and be an observer and read the room, read how the leader's communicating, read how the team's receiving, like even in a group setting. But you need to do this in a one-on-one basis as well. You need to know if someone's ready to receive it and how they're going to actually receive it. And again, this is another easy way as a leader that you can have a conversation and structure it out so that when you are giving that feedback or you're setting the stage to give that feedback, one of those considerations is, when's a good time to get feedback? Are you the type of person that would like to get it like right away? Or do you want me to wait and schedule time with you? Or how do you want that to occur? If I should see something and I think, there could be some opportunity for you to look at this in a different way. Again, this is where coaching is key, and learning this art comes over time. Like you are helping through your questioning to direct your employee to get to a place where they're looking inward and they're looking at it from a different perspective. And I see leaders make these mistakes all the time where they haven't really been able to even look at a person's ability to receive information at all. I mean, they're not even reading the body language, like the nonverbal body language. So if you have somebody whose hands are crossed, or they're like all clenched up, right? Or they're scooching forward and you're sitting side by side, like you have to have the ability to look at this and read that and notice that this might not be a good time. Listen, there were hundreds of times when I had conversations when I was learning where I didn't have mastery of this. And I would start to have a conversation and I could tell right away, just from that person's body language, that this was not a good time for that person. And so if that does happen to you, I think the best strategy and the best advice I can give you is to always say, I'm noticing that this might not be a good time for us to have this conversation. I'm just getting a sense that maybe you're thinking about it in a different perspective, or maybe there's something on your mind. Like, should we do this at another time, right? And offering that as an option is always a great way to show consideration to the person. Like you're taking their perspective in consideration. And that by and of itself is really going to build more trust for them to feel like there's this psychologically safe place for them to land. And the feedback and the delivery must be planned by you. I can't stress this enough. I mean, people really, really struggle with this. So there's lots of ways that you can do this. I mean, for some people, it's going to be just resisting the temptation to take an immediate action for a non-urgent feedback issue, right? That's number one. So if it's not a priority, immediate, urgent need, and it's a moment that can be coachable, you might want to think about when you do that. If you have meetings with team members and you check in each week to see how people are doing, maybe that's when you talk about it. Hey, there was a time last week when I remembered this situation and I didn't want to bother you with it, right? Because it really wasn't that urgent, but I did want us to talk about it because I wanted to have a conversation and I really wanted to see your perspective, wanted to understand it, but I also wanted to get a sense of if there was anything that you would have done differently in that situation, right? I mean, that's absolutely and perfectly appropriate to be able to do that. So I'm going to remind you here as a leader, a big piece of this is making sure that you're meeting with your teams on a regular basis, and it's not just like once a year during a performance review. I mean, it only has to be a few minutes. I mean, it really can be. And for those of you that have large teams where you're managing like a whole lot of people, this can be an incredible challenge to fit something in on a schedule to do it on a regular routine basis. I totally get it. But then go have a cup of coffee with somebody or find some time to actually just connect, even if it's for 5 minutes. I mean, part of your job as a leader is you're checking in on them, you're checking their well-being, and you're making sure that they're doing okay. And that is there anything that you could do as the leader to make it easier for them? And this is where I think we fail in leadership in healthcare over and over and over again. And we're not doing it because we have this intent that we want to do it. We're doing it because there's 1,000 things happening at the same time. And so it can be very easy to lose sight of the importance of like connecting with the people that you lead on a regular routine basis to make sure that you're noticing if something is going wrong, that you're there to offer support immediately. And sometimes it's just as simple as giving an encouraging and inspiring word. I mean, that's all it is. I did some education this week and I was thinking about, all of the people that I did across all 3 shifts. And, it was lots and lots of education and in services and doing things in a group setting. And I'm thinking about this situation where I was doing some education, and there was a nurse who was obviously incredibly distressed. I mean, during the actual in-service, I could see that she was distressed. But it wasn't that she was distressed and she was unwilling to listen, or maybe she was unwilling to listen. It was maybe the timing wasn't right for her. But when I started going through the in-service, I kept noticing out of the corner of my eye those behaviors. And then normally, when I would be doing any education like that, if I can really see that it's just not a good time for somebody, I literally would just stop and just let somebody know, hey, if you've got something to do, you're not going to hurt my feelings. I can connect with you in a little bit later. It's not a problem, right? I mean, that really sends a very clear message that, if this time isn't good, then that's fine. We'll find a time that works for you. But education is important. And I'm bringing it to you here in a quick micro learning so that I'm respecting that you're learning it in real time, but that you're busy and you've got a million things to do as well, right? But I think about this nurse and I think about how it quickly went from somebody who maybe had some distress to somebody that really just didn't even want to hear it. And that is a very dangerous practice in healthcare. And in fact, when I was sort of talking about it from sort of a regulatory perspective, not just like a humanistic perspective, but like regulatory and ethics and, all of it, to see somebody really respond in a way that took me aback. And in the manner in which this person did it, it really surprised me. And I remember saying, like, stopping the education and saying to the person, why wouldn't this be something that you wouldn't integrate into your practice every single day? And she said, because I've never had to do it this way and I've always done it that way. And I said, you know what the beautiful thing about healthcare is that I absolutely love and makes me so excited every single day is that through evidence-based practice, it evolves and it changes all the time. I mean, if I did the care that I delivered when I first became a nurse, today it might be malpractice because we learn and we grow and things evolve. And so that is why this education is important. Because we as healthcare workers have a duty and a responsibility to make sure that we're doing things the right way every single time, and we're relearning when we have to learn it differently. Even if it's something that we learned a long time ago and we've always done it that way. See, that takes tremendous courage, A, to address it, and B, to do it in a respectful and appropriate way, especially in a group setting. But I'm going to challenge you as a leader to really look at your team and look at those people that might have such a fixed mindset and a fixed way of doing. They're unwilling to look at anything anyway. You must know that if you're the person delivering feedback, because the way in which you engage with that person is going to need to evolve. And that's going to mean that a lot more is going to go into the planning and the execution. And you might even, and I would always encourage this, in those situations where they're much more complex, seek the support of another peer leader or someone above you. Listen, there have been hundreds of times I had to do this in the earliest parts of my career until I got to that state of having mastery in those coaching conversations. 100%. I would say maybe to an HR director, like, I have some concern and I would like additional support, or maybe someone that was above me, I have some concerns and I would like that additional support. There is nothing wrong with doing it in that manner. Actually, I would say it's incredibly courageous and bold because you're recognizing that the more important piece to the entire equation is that the information is conveyed in a way that the person has the ability to hear it. And if it doesn't come from you, because maybe that person might not hear it, and it comes from somebody else, then isn't it a win for the individual? I mean, who cares who provided the feedback, the most important piece is that it was heard and that it made somebody rethink the way that they were going to respond and react to a situation the next time. And that is why it's so important to deliver it in a way that you've built the trustful relationship and you've done your prep work and you've even practiced it out a few times. And don't be afraid and feel silly that you might have to do this with a partner or a spouse or a peer manager. There were tons of times I did that in my career where I had somebody and I would say, we're going to role play this. And I want because I want to practice it a couple times before I actually deliver it. I mean, that's completely acceptable and appropriate. And you should do the same thing. So don't forget, like part of that language that you're going to deliver, you're really focusing on the objective pieces of this. I mean, it's really very easy to slip into you as the leader pulling in a bunch of personal attributes and spouting those out. I mean, you're focusing on those observed behaviors, those things that you were able to see and observe firsthand. I mean, that is incredibly important. And so many times people, in their inability to plan those conversations, in their inability to do the prep work that was needed, instead, it just goes down a road and a pathway where we've now gone into all the personal attributes that we're now seeing of that person and how that leads into a feedback conversation that's gone horribly, horribly wrong. And remember, when it comes to feedback, we really have to be careful that we're not imbalanced in how we're delivering it. I mean, if you really want to score points with your team and you really want to build strong relationships, what you need to do in the very early stages of the formed relationship and throughout is to make sure you are balancing and overcompensating for those times where you're pointing out all the things that they do amazing and extraordinary. Because this way, when you have to talk about those tough conversations, that person understands it because they have been told all the things that they're doing really well. And that's hard for some people because it means you've got to be present. It means you've got to notice it. And it means you've got to get really good at gushing about the things that they're doing and that they're doing really well. And for some people, that's really hard when it comes to leadership. But I'm going to tell you, you've got to look at this as your opportunity. Again, I started the podcast off talking about this great article from Jody Helmer on why nurses quit, right? Like there's tons and tons of reasons, but if we really just focus on all of those leadership traits, right, we think about it, your goal is to create the conditions for people to thrive, not just to survive, but to thrive. And you want people to grow and get better and try different things and even like press themselves outside of their own comfort zones. And so to do that, you need to start to think about the individual and what is that person's hopes and dreams and goals. Like, what do they want in this world? And what I've seen in healthcare in so many roles is that conversation never occurs between a leader and a team member. And it is a missed opportunity. You are missing out, not just in inviting somebody to the table to have this discussion, but you're inviting them into a small little window of their world. What do you hope and dream for? Like, I know you're taking this position now and it's new and you're going to be learning and you're going to be not as proficient as everybody else. And don't worry about that. We're going to connect you with a really good buddy and mentor. And again, like I've said 100 times, I'm here. I'll be checking in with you. I'm going to make sure that everything is working for you. because I don't want you to be stressed, and I don't want you to feel like you can't do this, and I don't want you to be discouraged, and I don't want you to think, why bother? And I don't want you to think, I'm out of here, because you were born to do this work. And when I hired you, I saw something in you. I saw something so great in you, and I want to make sure that I'm giving you that opportunity to help grow and develop you. I mean, that changes everything when you're a leader and you're laser focused on your ability to do that. And don't forget, a big piece to all of this is making sure you're fully engaged and aligned with your organizational culture. So, if there are values that you strive to do, how does that come through in your examples and in your feedback? If quality is really important to you and that's one of your core values, then how are you ensuring that you are delivering quality feedback that's meant to have the individual look inward and really look at it from a place of safe self-discovery where they can say, I might do this differently. And do not forget, probably one of the most important pieces of when you do deliver that feedback, always build into your schedule time to follow up and check in on that person. And for some of you, based on what that conversation looked like, it might be you could check in with them in a week, right? Depending on how the conversation went. If the conversation didn't go the way it was intended, it's 100% appropriate to have that conversation the next day and to circle back and say to somebody, I've thought about this. I've really thought about this. I mean, you and I had this conversation, and when I went home at night, I thought about it over and over again, that I felt like it didn't land the way I was hoping it would land. And I want to revisit it because that was not my intent. My intent was for us to have a conversation and that we would talk about ways in which maybe the ideas that you had, that maybe you might see yourself doing this differently, and that I might be able to share sort of my observations. And I don't feel like it landed that way. I feel like when I look back, it landed really poorly. And so don't forget, that takes courage and vulnerability. But when it comes to leading people who take care of people, you doing that one simple thing is going to help them sort of look at things from a different perspective. If you're doing the follow-up and you're doing the support and you're circling back to make sure they're okay and they've thought about it and is there anything else that you can do to help support them, then how do you think they're going to interact with your patients? They're going to do the same thing. They're not just going to provide care and bolt and deliver, but they're going to follow through because you're leading the way and you're teaching and guiding them to look at it differently. And so if this is something that you're on the fence with and you're thinking, I don't know, I mean, I like the way I manage things now, and I don't see that I need to get mastery over this and become really great at it. I'm going to remind you of that article with the burnout. And we're not just talking about nurses. We're talking about everybody in healthcare. It's becoming difficult and much more challenging because we are competing with industries that have nothing to do with caring. Like the saddest thing that happens to me is when I see someone in any healthcare setting and they go for a job and it's outside the field altogether, not at all in healthcare, because, they've been lured away by, more money and better working conditions. I mean, here you've taken a person who's wired to care, and in your heart, just like you, that they're supposed to be doing this work because they're meant to care for human beings because they do it and they do it so well, and they just haven't figured out how powerful their superpower is. But when they do, it's because of you. You were that leader that created this safe place. You were that leader that created the conditions for those conversations, those two-way conversations to occur. And you were that leader that inspired them and motivated them to look at a situation differently. I mean, you can see how that is going to impact the way healing occurs, not just for your team members, but for the way care delivery occurs. It's going to have a tremendous impact, and that's going to require that you take the action and learn and gain mastery of your feedback skills. Listen, I hope that you enjoyed this podcast this week, and I hope that you listen in to a future podcast. And always remember, as a leader, you have a tremendous opportunity, but it's all gained. Mastery is gained through practice and doing it over and over again in different situations, in different experiences, so that you can be the best leader possible. And you're doing it. So keep doing it, because we need you in healthcare and we need you engaged so that you can continue to engage with your teams. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye.